What happens when Hollywood royalty sits down for what should be a routine interview, only to face the most disrespectful host on daytime television? In just 41 seconds, one inflammatory comment would trigger an explosive confrontation that would expose the true character of a talk show host who clearly forgot who she was speaking to. Samuel L. Jackson walked onto the Tamron Hall show set that Tuesday afternoon with the same commanding presence that has made him one of the most respected actors of our time. The studio audience erupted in applause as he made his way to the guest chair, flashing that signature smile that has charmed moviegoers for decades. Tamron Hall, dressed in her usual bright blazer and forced smile, seemed almost annoyed by the enthusiastic reception her guest was receiving. Well, Samuel L. Jackson, everyone. Tamron began with what can only be described as barely contained irritation. I have to say, you certainly know how to make an entrance. Samuel settled into his chair with the grace of someone who has done thousands of interviews. Thank you for having me, Tamron. Always good to be here. But something was off. The usual warmth that talk show hosts extend to their guests was nowhere to be found. Instead, Tamron leaned forward with an expression that seemed more confrontational than welcoming. So Samuel, let's get right into it, she said, her tone sharp. You've been in Hollywood for 40 years now? And yet here you are, still trying to stay relevant. Tell me, when do you think it's time for actors of your generation to step aside and make room for younger talent? The question hit like a slap across the face. Samuel's eyebrows raised slightly, the only indication of his surprise at such an unprofessional opening. The studio audience fell silent, sensing the tension that had just filled the room. I'm sorry, what? Samuel replied, his voice calm but with an edge that anyone familiar with his films would recognize. Step aside? Tamron, I'm curious about something. Did someone tell you I was here to announce my retirement? Because that wasn't on my schedule. Tamron laughed, but there was no humor in it. Oh, come on, Samuel. Don't be so sensitive. I'm just asking the questions our viewers want to know. At 75, surely you must be thinking about slowing down. 75? Samuel's voice remained controlled, but his posture shifted. Tamron, I'm 74, and I'm wondering if your research team actually prepared for this interview, or if you just decided to wing it and hope for the best. The host waved her hand dismissively. 74, 75, what's the difference? The point is, you're not exactly spring chicken anymore, are you? Samuel stared at her for a long moment. The difference is accuracy, Tamron, something that used to matter in journalism. But please, continue with your questions. I'm fascinated to see where this is going. Tamron seemed oblivious to the warning signs. Instead of backing down, she doubled down on her aggressive approach. Look, Samuel, let's be honest here. Your recent movies haven't exactly been blockbusters. Some people are saying that maybe you've lost your edge. What do you say to critics who think you're just coasting on your past success? The question was loaded with disrespect, and Samuel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Which critics are those, Tamron? I'd love to know their names so I can send them tickets to my next premiere. Oh, industry insiders. People in the know, she replied vaguely, clearly making it up as she went along. Industry insiders, Samuel repeated slowly. Interesting, because just last week, I wrapped filming on a project that 3 different studios were fighting to produce. But maybe your industry insiders know something I don't. Tamron's smile became even more forced. Well, maybe they're just being polite. You know how Hollywood works. Sometimes they give older actors projects out of nostalgia rather than talent. The insult hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Samuel's hands, which had been resting casually on the arm of his chair, now gripped it slightly. Nostalgia, he said quietly. Is that what you think my career is based on? I'm just saying what some people think, Tamron replied with a shrug that seemed calculated to infuriate. Don't shoot the messenger. Samuel leaned forward slightly. Tamron, I've been doing this job since before you were born. I've worked with directors who shaped cinema history. I've been in films that have grossed billions of dollars worldwide. So when you sit there and suggest that my work is charity, I have to wonder what exactly you're trying to accomplish here. But Tamron wasn't finished. If anything, she seemed energized by his growing frustration. Look, Samuel, I'm not trying to hurt your feelings. I'm just doing my job. Maybe if you weren't so defensive, we could have a real conversation. Defensive? Samuel's voice rose slightly for the first time. Tamron, defending yourself against unprofessional questions isn't being defensive. It's having self-respect. The host rolled her eyes. There you go again with the attitude. This is exactly what people are talking about. Maybe the problem isn't Hollywood. Maybe the problem is you. The studio fell completely silent. Even the cameras seemed to stop moving. Samuel L. Jackson stared at Tamron Hall with a look that could have melted steel. When he spoke, his voice was dangerously quiet. "What did you just say to me?" Tamron, either not recognizing the danger she was in or simply not caring, pressed forward. "I said maybe the problem is you, Samuel. Maybe that's why your career isn't what it used to be. Maybe that's why you're here on my show instead of The Tonight Show." The comparison was the final straw. Samuel's composure, which had been hanging by a thread, finally snapped. He stood up slowly, his full height towering over the seated host. "Let me explain something to you, Tamron," he said, his voice carrying the weight of decades of experience and respect. "I came here as a courtesy. I came here because someone on your team asked me to promote my work. I did not come here to be insulted by someone who clearly doesn't understand the first thing about professionalism." Tamron tried to interrupt, but Samuel continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. "You want to know why I'm not on The Tonight Show? Because I choose where I go. You want to know why my career isn't what it used to be? Because it's better. Every year it gets better, because I keep learning, I keep growing, and I keep earning respect." The host was clearly flustered now, her usual composure cracking. "Samuel, please sit down. We're on television here." "Yes, we are on television," Samuel agreed, "which makes your behavior even more embarrassing." "For you?" He remained standing, looking down at her with a mixture of disappointment and barely controlled anger. "I've been in this business long enough to recognize disrespect when I see it, Tamron. And what I see here is someone who forgot that having a television show doesn't give you the right to treat your guests like they're beneath you." Tamron's face flushed red as she realized her interview was spiraling completely out of control. The studio audience sat in stunned silence, some pulling out their phones to record what was clearly becoming television history. But instead of apologizing or trying to salvage the situation professionally, Tamron made the worst possible choice. She decided to fight back. "Excuse me, Samuel," she said, her voice rising to match his intensity. "This is my show. My name is on the building, not yours. If you don't like the questions, then maybe you shouldn't have agreed to come here." Samuel's eyes narrowed. "Your show?" he repeated slowly. "Let me tell you something about shows, Tamron. A show is only as good as the respect it shows its guests. And right now, your show is failing spectacularly." Tamron stood up as well, clearly trying to match his presence, though she fell far short. "I don't need lecture from someone who's clearly past his prime about how to run my show." The phrase "past his prime" hit the studio like a thunderbolt. Several audience members audibly gasped. Samuel's face went completely stone cold. "Past my prime," he said, his voice so quiet it was almost a whisper. "You really want to go there, don't you?" Tamron, emboldened by what she mistook for weakness, pressed her attack. "I'm just being honest, Samuel. Sometimes the truth hurts. Maybe if more people told you the truth instead of kissing up to you because you're famous, you'd understand where I'm coming from." Samuel stepped closer to her desk, his presence filling the entire studio. "The truth? You want to talk about truth? Here's some truth for you, Tamron. I've been making movies since you were learning to tie your shoes. I've worked with Quentin Tarantino, Spike Lee, George Lucas. I've been nominated for Academy Awards. I've got a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. So when you sit there and tell me I'm past my prime, what exactly are you basing that on?" Tamron waved her hand dismissively again, a gesture that was becoming more irritating each time she used it. "Awards don't mean everything, Samuel. Box office numbers don't lie. When's the last time you had a real hit?" "A real hit?" Samuel's voice was incredulous. "Tamron, do you even watch movies? Or do you just read headlines and think you understand the film industry?" The host crossed her arms defensively. "I know enough to know that your last few movies went straight to streaming. That's not exactly a sign of success." Samuel laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Streaming? You mean the platform that reaches hundreds of millions of people worldwide? The same streaming services that are revolutionizing how content is consumed? Tamron, you're talking about the future of entertainment like it's some kind of failure." "Well, it's certainly not the big screen success you used to have," she shot back stubbornly. "Used to have?" Samuel's patience was wearing dangerously thin. "Tamron, I was in a Marvel movie 2 years ago that made over $1 billion. But apparently your research team missed that too." The audience began to murmur among themselves. It was becoming clear to everyone in the studio that their host had come completely unprepared and was now embarrassing herself on live television. But Tamron seemed oblivious to the growing disaster. "Look, Samuel, you're clearly emotional about this," she said with condescending tone that made everyone in the room uncomfortable. Maybe we should take a commercial break so you can collect yourself." The suggestion that he needed to collect himself was the spark that lit the fuse. Samuel's composure, which had been holding by the thinnest thread, finally exploded. "Emotional?" His voice boomed across the studio. "You invite me onto your show, insult my age, insult my career, insult my intelligence, and then tell me I'm being emotional when I respond with facts? Tamron, the only emotional person in this room is you, and your emotion is jealousy." "Jealousy?" Tamron's voice cracked slightly. "Jealous of what?" "Jealous of a career that spans decades. Jealous of respect that's earned, not given. Jealous of someone who built their reputation through hard work instead of just being handed a television show." The words hit Tamron like physical blows. Her face went from red to pale in seconds. "How dare you?" she whispered. "How dare I what?" Samuel demanded. "How dare I defend myself against your unprofessional behavior? How dare I expect basic courtesy from someone who calls herself a journalist? How dare I demand the respect that I've earned through 40 years of excellence?" Tamron was clearly scrambling now, looking around the studio as if searching for help. "Samuel, you're making a scene. Our viewers don't want to see this kind of behavior." "Your viewers," Samuel said, gesturing toward the audience, "are watching their host attack a guest for no reason other than her own insecurity. Your viewers are watching you embarrass yourself and this network on live television." The host tried one last desperate attack. "Well, maybe if you weren't so arrogant, people wouldn't have problems with you. It was the wrong thing to say." Samuel stepped even closer to her desk, his full presence bearing down on her. "Arrogant? Tamron, confidence earned through decades of success isn't arrogance. Arrogance is thinking you can insult someone who's achieved more in 1 year than you have in your entire career." "I've had a very successful career," Tamron protested weakly. "Have you?" Samuel's question cut through the air like a knife. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like your idea of success is tearing down people who are better than you." The studio was completely silent except for the hum of the cameras. Tamron looked around desperately, clearly hoping someone would step in to save her. But her crew, apparently as shocked by her behavior as everyone else, remained frozen. "This interview is over," Samuel announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to command. "I came here to talk about my work, not to be insulted by someone who clearly has no respect for her guests or her profession." But Tamron, in what would prove to be the final nail in her professional coffin, decided to make one last stand. "You can't just walk out on me, Samuel. This is live television. You have an obligation to finish this interview." Samuel stopped in his tracks and turned back to face her. The look in his eyes was terrifying. "An obligation?" His voice was deadly quiet. "The only obligation I had was to show up, which I did. Your obligation was to conduct a professional interview, which you failed to do. So no, Tamron, I don't have any obligation to sit here and let you embarrass yourself further." Tamron's desperation reached a new level as she watched her interview collapse in real time. Instead of accepting defeat gracefully, she made the catastrophic decision to try one final power play that would seal her fate forever. "Fine, Samuel," she said, her voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "If you want to act like a diva and storm off my set, that's your choice. But don't expect anyone in this industry to take you seriously after this tantrum." The threat hung in the air like poison gas. Samuel, who had been moving toward the exit, stopped dead in his tracks. When he turned around, his expression was something that would haunt Tamron Hall for the rest of her career. "A tantrum," he repeated, his voice so low it was almost inaudible. "You think this is a tantrum?" The entire studio held its breath. Even the camera operators seemed afraid to move. Samuel walked back toward the desk with the slow, deliberate pace of a man who had reached his absolute limit. "Let me tell you what a tantrum looks like, Tamron," he said, each word precisely articulated. "A tantrum is what you've been throwing for the last 20 minutes because you realized you were completely unprepared for this interview." Tamron tried to interrupt, but Samuel's voice rose to cut her off completely. "A tantrum is attacking your guest because you're insecure about your own abilities. A tantrum is threatening someone's career because they won't sit quietly while you disrespect them." The host was visibly shaking now, but she couldn't seem to stop herself from making things worse. "I'm not threatening anyone. I'm just stating facts about how this industry works." "Facts?" Samuel's laugh was harsh and bitter. "Here's a fact for you, Tamron. I've been working in this industry since before you knew what a camera was. Here's another fact. My phone will ring tomorrow with 3 new job offers. Here's one more fact. Your behavior today will be remembered long after your show is canceled." The prediction hit Tamron like a physical blow, and she stumbled backward slightly. "My show isn't going anywhere," she said, but her voice lacked any conviction. "Your show," Samuel said, gesturing around the studio, "just broadcast 25 minutes of you attacking a guest who came here as a favor. Your show just showed the world what kind of person you really are. Your show just proved that having a platform doesn't make you worthy of it." Tamron's face was now completely drained of color. She looked around frantically at her crew, but they were all staring at Samuel with a mixture of fear and admiration. No one was coming to her rescue. "I was doing my job," she whispered, her earlier bravado completely gone. "Your job," Samuel said, moving closer to her desk, "is to make your guests feel welcome. Your job is to ask thoughtful questions that inform your audience. Your job is to conduct yourself with professionalism and dignity. You failed at every single aspect of your job today." The host tried one last desperate plea. "Samuel, please, can we just start over? I think there was a misunderstanding." The word misunderstanding seemed to break something inside Samuel. His voice, when he spoke again, carried the full weight of his decades in the entertainment industry. "A misunderstanding?" he said incredulously. "Tamron, there was no misunderstanding. You understood exactly what you were doing when you called me past my prime. You understood exactly what you were doing when you suggested my career was based on nostalgia. You understood exactly what you were doing when you told me the problem was me." Each accusation hit Tamron like a hammer blow. She gripped the edge of her desk as if it was the only thing keeping her upright. "You knew what you were doing?" Samuel continued relentlessly. "And you did it anyway because you thought I would just sit there and take it. You thought wrong." The studio was so quiet that the sound of Samuel removing his microphone seemed to echo off the walls. He placed it carefully on the guest chair and looked at Tamron one final time. "I've met a lot of people in this business, Tamron. Good people and bad people. People who earned their success and people who had it handed to them. But I've never met anyone who was so willing to destroy their own reputation just to try to hurt someone else." Tamron opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. She was completely defeated, and everyone in the studio could see it. Samuel straightened his jacket and looked directly into the main camera. "To anyone watching this at home, I want you to know that I have nothing but respect for good journalists and good talk show hosts. This," he gestured toward Tamron without looking at her, "is not what good journalism looks like." He turned back to the host one final time. "Tamron, I hope someday you learn that success isn't about tearing other people down. It's about building something worthwhile. Today, you had the chance to do that. Instead, you chose to show the world who you really are." With that, Samuel L. Jackson walked off the Tamron Hall, set with the same dignity and presence he had entered with. The only difference was that now, everyone in that studio understood they had witnessed something extraordinary. They had seen a master class in how to handle disrespect with grace, strength, and unshakable self-respect. Behind him, Tamron Hall stood alone at her desk, surrounded by cameras that were still rolling, and a studio audience that had watched her destroy her own credibility in real time. The silence that filled the studio wasn't just the absence of sound. It was the sound of a career ending and a reputation being lost forever, all because one talk show host forgot that respect is earned, not demanded, and that true professionalism means lifting your guests up, not tearing them down.